So I reckon I'll start off with just chatting to all three of you about where your desire to explore came from. Because I guess the Explorers Club kind of focuses on that a bit.
And scientific exploration and research as well.
Okay, and like we'll expand out into that.
Sure.
And then, oh, you don't need to wear headphones. I just prefer wear them. And then just a quick mic technique. So try and have the mic right in front of you, and about that distance. Perfect. And I can always turn up the volume if we need to.
No worries. And Lucy, isn't it?
Yes,
Lucy.
Lucy.
Yeah, good.
UB40 with I Got You Babe from their 1985 album Best of UB40, probably from another album as well. You're listening to Lucy Cutting from Your Afternoon. Now, a club that's been around since 1904 has finally made its way to Tasmania and will hold its first Tasmanian event tonight. The Explorers Club is an international society dedicated to preserving that instinct to explore. Todd is the chairman of the Australia and New Zealand chapter, and joining me in studio also is Eric Phillips and Melinda Brown, who are the first two speakers at this particular event tonight. Thank you all for dropping by the studio.
Thank you for having us.
Nice to be here.
I think a good place to start when we're talking about exploring is where all of your desires to explore came from. Do you remember?
I remember being quite young. My area is whale and dolphin behavioural studies, and I remember going on whale watching boats with my family and always wondering what the whales were doing under the water. I think that's probably my first memory of wanting to explore my field.
And what about for you, Eric?
Yeah, pretty similar to Mel actually, because I think most of us are introduced somewhere in early life, and that's usually with our families. So, you know, my parents were really into being in the outdoors and hiking in the Grampians and the Flinders and that kind of stuff, and really it just stemmed from there.
And Todd as well?
Well, mine's actually quite the opposite. My mother, God bless her, I love her, but she looked at me as a child and thought that there were all these evil snakes and spiders in the bush, so she never let me go camping or in scouts or anything like that. So when I got old enough to be more independent with what I did with my time, you couldn't keep me out of the bush.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Sometimes when people try to stop you from doing something, that's when you become most passionate about it.
Absolutely. It was like that candy I could never have.
So the Explorers Club, it is more than exploring though, isn't it? It's also, a part of it is about research too. Is that right, Todd?
Absolutely. It's basically a meeting place for adventurers and scientists. You'll find that a lot of our members will be people like Dr. Sylvia Earle, all the Apollo astronauts are members, people like Jim Cameron are members. So it brings together science and adventure.
And for Eric and Melinda as well, you're both the speakers for tonight. What has been your adventures since you stepped out into that world and started exploring?
For me, I'll be talking about what I did as the Rolex Scholar for the Our World Underwater Scholarship Society. So in a year, I went on 70 different flights to 18 different countries, all just trying to learn about whale and dolphin behaviour and some coral reef biology stuff as well. But my talk will be about that. Yeah.
That is massive. And what about for you, Eric?
Well, mine is about my fascination with cold and ice and snow, which has existed in me pretty much all my life. I remember back in the early days, you know, looking at books that my parents had, or National Geographic magazines and Australian Geographic magazines on the shelves, and always honing in on the pictures of these Michelin men walking around the Arctic and Antarctic with these big, you know, puffy costumes on. It's like, wow, I want to be like that person. I want to be in that kind of environment. So, you know, since those early days, I've been focused on learning about the polar environment to the point where I could finally be there and undertake long journeys, long expeditions, and in particular to the North and South Poles. And so my talk tonight will actually be a 24-hour snapshot of what it's like to be on an Arctic expedition and an Antarctic expedition, two really cold environments, but a bit like chalk and cheese.
Mm. When you think back to looking through those books and learning about these other environments through National Geographic and all these kind of wondrous magazines and publications, was it the same when you actually stepped into that environment? Was it what you expected it to be?
it was as exciting, if not more. You know, it was everything that I dreamed of. In fact, my first experience really in Antarctica was working with the Australian Antarctic Division and finding myself on the coast of Antarctica and thinking, it's actually not as cold as I thought it would be.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because of course you go there in summertime, and Antarctica on the coastline in summertime can be quite warm. You know, it can be 0, 5 below, 5 above, and that's really tolerable. When you start to go onto the high Antarctic plateau or the Arctic Ocean in springtime or late winter, that's when you start to experience temperatures of -30, -40 towards the -50s, and that's always that was the experience that I was looking for, those kind of extreme cold temperatures.
And then I think, Melinda, you're at the other end of the spectrum. You've been going to all these warm places. You've been going to Fiji and all these kind of quite warm, delightfully warm places.
Yeah.
What has it done to your research and looking into marine environments to travel to all these different countries?
It's been really interesting because I have done a lot of warm places, but then I have done some cold places. So I spent a bit of time in Scotland working with some bottlenose dolphins there, and I did get in the water, and it's the very top of Scotland, so it was quite cold in the water with those dolphins, yeah. But no, it's been really amazing going to so many different places, but it's also been very hard because I guess everybody knows that the ocean is facing a lot of challenges at the moment, and they're very obvious when you are in the water. So I mean, it was quite hard to see a lot of ecosystems that were failing and were struggling, but I did get to see a lot of places that were still quite pristine. I visited Palau, and the reefs there were extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it.
And doing these dives and going down into those environments, what are the challenges that those environments are facing that you're actually seeing?
A lot of it is related to climate change. So mostly the reefs, they're very obvious when they're bleaching or stressed. The coral fluoresce and they glow a really bright colour. So that's quite an obvious sign that you see. It looks beautiful, but it's actually the coral sort of screaming for help. So that's a really big thing. Marine pollution as well. I spent a bit of time in Indonesia and places like that, and I was on a reef and there would have been 20 turtles around me swimming around everywhere, but there was just plastic all through the water column, and as much as we tried to collect as much as we could, it was just never ending really, and that was quite devastating.
I always find it quite shocking when you discover how far plastic has travelled as well. I recently had somebody in studio who was seeing plastic in Antarctica, and it had just travelled so far, not just from Australia but from other countries as well. Have you noticed also, Eric, in your own adventures that climate and environment are things that are changing?
Certainly. Well, the one thing that really connects Mel and I is the ocean. So I spend a lot of time on the Arctic Ocean. And although I see it mostly in its frozen state, now and again it splits apart and you get these leads of open water, and you've got to find a way of negotiating those, crossing them or walking around. But it's the Arctic Ocean really that's suffering most at the hands of climate change, much more so than the parts of Antarctica that I commonly go to, the Antarctic Plateau and East Antarctica, which is just this giant cold sink, and it's not feeling the effects of climate change that much. But the Arctic Ocean certainly, and I'm visiting scientists that are operating on the Arctic Ocean every year. And they're in the middle of studies that have been going on for more than 10 years. So I talk to them every year, and they're telling me firsthand that stuff is happening, and it's by and large happening faster than we're led to believe. So for all those climate change doubters out there, if only I could take them up to the Arctic and speak to these very scientists that are getting the data firsthand, they would have a very strong recognition that stuff's changing, and I'm seeing it too. And in Antarctica, West Antarctica in particular, the Antarctic Peninsula, that's changing very, very fast. They're now, the reports of grass growing on the hills there, and penguin colonies are in decline, and glaciers are receding. So yes, there are big changes afoot, and we've all got to work a bit harder to try to stem that tide, I think.
Todd, the first event in Hobart for the Explorers Club is tonight. Do you expect more events to be happening in the very near future?
Absolutely. We have a very dedicated manager down here, Margaret Bowling, who has put together all tonight. And I've just flown in as the chairman with my banners from Sydney, but this will be an ongoing series, and of course, Tasmania itself is a wilderness frontier. By its very nature, the people who live in Tasmania are adventurous, so there's no shortage of people to present for us, and certainly to come along and hear these people speak. And can I just say that tonight, you don't have to be a member of the Explorers Club to come. It's open, as with all of our events, it's open to our members and members of the public to hear our stories.
Well, you can check it out tonight, Explorers Club at Captain Byers in Hobart. What time does it kick off, Todd?
6 o'clock, and you can get the tickets from www.anzac, that's ANZEC.org.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your time. I've had like this delightful little snapshot of a very interesting chat, I think.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Good. Okay.
That was great.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Fascinating. And keep in touch, because I'd love to get
Every
guests
time we
to-
do, I'll send you through, and also
Oh, awesome.
yeah, I'll just send PR releases every time when you're doing something.
Oh, sweet, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd
Thank
be
you
great.
s-
Thank you so much.
thank you so
Lovely to
much.
meet you both.
Okay.